So hello everyone, and welcome to our session and panel discussion on learning and assessment. My name is Sam DeReign, and I'm on the educator community team here at Course Hero, and I am so incredibly honored and grateful to be in such good company today, both with our panelists and our wonderful audience members. I hope everyone is ready for lots of insights and perspectives, because this is going to be a jam-packed session, which will consist of two parts. So for the first half, my colleague Shireen is going to be sharing the results of a survey that we sent to students and faculty about online learning and assessment. And this is a survey that went out to more than 2,700 students and 350 faculty. And the responses we got back really helped shed light on the factors that help drive student success, as well as the factors that create barriers for teaching and learning. This, of course, created an opportunity for discourse and discussion around several hot button issues for students and faculty. And so that's why we also wanted to bring in a panel discussion for the second half of this session. As we're going through today's session, please feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat box. We'll have people in the chat who can respond, and if we have time at the end for the panel to answer anything, we can do that as well. But without further ado, I will turn it over to my colleague Shireen to share the results and insights on our learning and assessment survey. Take it away, Shireen.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay. All right. So, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to talk through our annual State of the Student Study and to hear our latest qualitative and quantitative research and insights. This year, we decided to focus on the topics of learning and assessment, and we expanded to hear from both students and educators this year. So we're going to be walking through our findings today with you, and then as Sam said, we'll move into a panel where you'll get a chance to hear from 2 students and 2 educators and their personal experiences and thoughts surrounding the topics we're covering today. As questions arise throughout our presentation, please input them into the Q&A feature, and we'll answer them at the end. See, there we go. So who am I? I'm Shireen. I'm on the user experience research team here at Course Hero. Our role is to help study college students and educators around the US in order to get a better understanding of their day, their week, where do they spend the most time, what keeps them up at night, what are their pain points, and what do they do about it? And then we help build solutions that fit a real need. So our main question today is, what are educator and student views on learning and assessment practices? Where do they diverge, and where is their common ground? We're going to go through the following themes: learning motivations, barriers, resources, assessment methods and grading, and thoughts surrounding learning with integrity. Our main goal is to inform evolving pedagogy, and so this study hopes to shed light on student and educator views around the experience of teaching and learning and the factors that are motivating and creating barriers to student success in a changing higher education landscape. So to ensure we meet this goal, we set out to answer the following questions. What motivates students to learn, and what are the barriers that they experience today? What study resources do students and educators find appropriate? How do students and educators feel about assessment practices and grading in higher ed? And what do educators and students think is the fairest way to assess learning and prepare them for the workforce? We purposely asked educators and students the same questions to identify alignments and misalignments. So all of these informed what research questions to answer, and we're going to answer these and many more throughout our presentation today. For our research methodology, we conducted one quantitative survey with Course Hero student users with an N size of 2,702, and another separate quantitative survey with Course Hero educators with an N size of 345. For both groups, we have a variety of subject areas, ages, undergraduate and graduate school, institution types, etc. And finally, we synthesized our data together to report internally and externally. So let's start by seeing how our survey respondents compare to the national data on student demographics. When it comes to gender, we had slightly more female respondents and slightly less male respondents than the national average. And where we differ more is in age. On the right, you can see over 75% of undergraduate students around the US are younger than 35, compared to just 50% of our undergraduate respondents. Almost 50% of our student respondents were older, falling in the 35 to 64 age range. That's something that we want to keep in mind as we look through our findings today. And in the future, we do plan to run an additional study on the same topic with the general student and educator population. Okay, so let's get to what we learned. We're going to go into our top insights and we're going to go theme by theme. And our first theme today is student learning motivations. We're going to cover what students reported their goals are when it comes to school and how they overlap and differ from what educators think student goals are. Okay, so when we ask students what their top 3 goals are when it comes to school, here's what we saw. Students were most likely to identify getting a degree, preparing for a career, and personal growth as their top 3 goals. Having fun and getting into a graduate program ranked lowest on the student list at just 12 and 10%. When we asked educators what they thought their students' top 3 goals are, 82% stated that their students' top goal was to prepare for a career, 72% said get a degree, and 32% said maintain a high GPA. So let's look at these answers another way. As we can see, personal growth and mastering the material ranked slightly higher for students than maintaining a high GPA. Maintaining a high GPA is of less importance to students than faculty believe, with less than 50% of students at any institution type naming it as a top priority. And students had much more of an interest in personal growth and developing independence than educators reported. 47% of students identified this as one of their top goals, while just 19% of educators named it as a top priority for students. Students' top goals were also much more diverse than what educators have perceived. More than 70% of educators agreed with each other about students' top 2 goals, while only about 50% of students agreed within themselves about their top 3 goals. So now that we've looked at student goals, let's look at what's impacting their learning. The next theme we're going to cover today is barriers to learning. We're going to look at what students feel is most impacting their ability to learn and where educators and students overlap and diverge. So here's what students reported when we asked them to select the top 3 things that are impacting your ability to learn, if any. Students' top 3 choices were balancing family obligations and studies, having to work, and the need for more detailed breakdowns of course material. When we asked educators what they thought were the top 3 things impacting students' ability to learn, here's what we saw. Educators selected having to work, balancing family obligations and studies, and difficulty setting aside time to study as the top 3 barriers they believe students have. There's definitely some overlap here, but when we look at the more school-centric options, we find that students are saying that they feel there are certain things they need from their school. For example, 30% of students said that they need more detailed breakdowns of course material. 20% said they need more practice problems than provided by the school, and 20% said they need more personalized instruction. So more practice problems and more breakdowns of course material didn't make it high on the educator list. Instead, we see they don't use office hours and internet access as part of the top barriers educators believe students have. So now that we have a better idea of what students' goals are and what they feel is impacting their ability to learn, let's look at where they're going for help. The next theme we're going to cover today is learning resources. What we'll be looking at here is where students are going and what resources they're using when they need help for school, and then what educators think are appropriate resources for students to use. The majority of students surveyed report that online study tools, Google, and assigned materials from class are the top 3 resources they use to do well in their classes. Let's look at the full list. So as we can see, online resources enjoy widespread popularity among these student respondents. Other than assigned course materials at 65%, online study tools, Google, and YouTube were top resources these students access to get support with their courses. In-person or institution-centric options like study groups, office hours, and in-person tutoring were much less commonly used. That being said, we have been in the middle of a pandemic where we know a lot of students lost their in-person resources for school. And given the audience who received the survey, we know that they have a tendency to use online tools, so this isn't surprising. And now let's look at what educators said. When we asked educators what they felt were appropriate resources for their students to seek help from to do well in their classes, the majority of educators surveyed report that assigned materials, office hours, and study groups are the top 3 resources they think are appropriate for students to use. And when we look at these 2 lists together, we can see that educators view institution-centric resources like office hours, study groups, and in-person tutoring as the best way to support student success. 81% of educators stated that office hours was an appropriate resource for students, while only 15% of students reported actually using them. And educators were also much less likely than students to report online resources as appropriate, with much smaller percentages of educators naming online study tools and Google as resources students should use. Okay, our next theme for today is assessment methods. What do students and educators think are fair methods of assessment? Here's what we saw when we asked students, which of the following assessment methods do you feel are a fair way of evaluating your knowledge and understanding in classes? So students feel that homework is the most fair way to assess knowledge, followed by online discussions or forums, essays, and presentations. We asked students to elaborate a bit on why they chose these methods, and here's what we heard. We heard school assessments should match the real world. So one student said, the real world is all about how you use resources, not what you can remember to fill in a checkbox. Another student stated, I think open notes and peer discussion are important. In the real world, you don't need to memorize everything. You just need to know where and how to find the information. So this seemed to be a dominant theme, that there are seemingly 2 schools of thought. One being, school should test your knowledge without additional resources, and the other being this, that in the real world, you're not only allowed, but you're encouraged to use additional resources to solve your problems, and school should mirror that. Another thing we heard is that exams put unnecessary stress on students. So we heard, proctored exams make me anxious and I lose focus. I become concerned about how I move or if I look around as I think. And another student said, proctored exams put a lot of pressure on students. It feels invasive. And last, not all methods work with online learning. One student said, essays, open book exams, open note exams, completed study guides. Online learning is limited to only a few things in most cases. And another student said, when you work via computer, it's hard to do group projects or attend lectures. So now let's take a look at what educators reported. On the right, we can see that educators agree that homework is the most fair way of assessing student knowledge. Presentations, independent projects, essays, and online discussions also made both groups top list. After that, they diverge. Open book exams made it 5th on the students' list of 21 different assessment methods, whereas for educators, it was down at 8th. But proctored exams was 6th on educators' list of fair assessment methods at 43%, and it ranked far lower on students' list at 21%. We saw earlier from student responses that many of them feel that exams put unnecessary pressure on them, so this aligns with that. So we also asked educators to tell us more about why they chose what they did. So let's see what educators had to say about assessment methods. We heard exams work because they assess knowledge and students can't cheat. One educator stated, proctored exams and pop quizzes. These methods adequately assess whether students have learned the material and can apply what they have learned. Another said, essays, proctored exams, labs, timed essays are the only ways that students can truly show what they know. They cannot cheat on a proctored exam, they cannot cheat in the lab, and they cannot cheat on essays. We also heard assessment methods should vary because students are different. We heard assessments should be varied. One cannot adequately determine a student's true understanding of content with one type of assessment. And another educator said, homework, labs, study guides, proctored exams, different students show their knowledge in different ways. And finally, assessment methods evolve with online learning. This educator mentioned, in remote operations, I cannot control what students have in front of them completely. So open book exam is an option with a time limit. If in person, I might allow open notes, but not open book. My adaptation is the online environment. So we've seen what educators think of existing assessment methods, but we also wanted to know what they'd want in an ideal world. We asked educators, if you had unlimited resources, what would be your preferred method of assessing learning and understanding? And what we saw is that many educators want their students to apply their learning and they want to be able to assess them one-on-one. So we heard, I'd create service and experiential learning projects with local organizations so students could learn and apply their learning in a real application. Other educators stated, one-on-one discussions between professor and student, and individual discussions with each student. All right, we're going to move into our next theme now, which is educator and student viewpoints on grading. We asked students to select the top 3 purposes that they believe grading within higher education serves. And here's what they said. 61% stated that grading is to determine how much of the course material is understood by students. 50% stated it's to assess student performance in an efficient manner, and close behind was document students' performance to evaluate the effectiveness of school programs. When we asked educators the same question, what do they think are the top 3 purposes of grading? Here's what we saw. We saw that there is some alignment. Both students and educators agreed on the top 2 purposes of grading, but for their third, educators reported provide information to students for self-evaluation. While for students, they selected document students' performance to evaluate the effectiveness of school programs, and provide information to students for self-evaluation came 4th on the student list. It's interesting to note that students would see grading as a signifier for their school before they see it as a signifier for themselves. The last theme we're going to cover today is learning with integrity. In this theme, we asked students which of the following practices they consider as learning with integrity, and then we asked educators the same question. When we asked students which practices they consider as learning with integrity, here's what we saw. Students ranked finding pieces of information on various online resources that help me arrive at the answer myself as number 1, collaborating with other students to create study guides as number 2, followed by finding an answer online that validates my own answer, and finding solutions to an exam online and using it to practice for an upcoming exam. We also asked students to tell us more about why they chose these answers. So let's see what they said. Learning involves research and effort at both school and work. So we heard Most of these are learning with integrity because it shows some level of work, research, and efforts to find or come up with the right answer. And all of this reflect current workplace practices, collaboration, research, teamwork, or hiring independent contractors, expert, or help. And working with peers is helpful for students. So one student stated, collaborating with other students to create a study guide helps everyone because they might see something that they think will be on the test that you didn't think of. It allows you to study the other parts of the course that you may or may not have seen as important. And finally, verifying online provides confirmation to students. Finding information online helps to know if I'm on the right track, like a check and balance. And another student stated, finding answers and information online validate my being able to navigate the internet for resources and that my initial thoughts on answers were correct. Next, we asked educators the same question, and here's how they compared. We actually can see that there is a lot of alignment between educators and students on this one, with collaborating with other students to create study guides, finding pieces of information on various online resources that helps them arrive at the answer, finding an answer online that validates their own answer, and finding solutions to an exam online and using it to practice for an upcoming exam, making up the exact same top 4 as students. Okay, those are all the findings that we have so far. We plan to publish and share the research findings in August, so please look out for an email announcement with all of the data. Thank you everyone for listening and participating in the study. We super appreciate it and we hope you found the data helpful. And now it's panel time, so I'm going to give the stage back to Sam and you're going to get to hear from our student and educator guests. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Shireen. And welcome everybody to the panel discussion piece of our session. So as we just saw, a year and a half of pivoting and adapting and learning has, perhaps not surprisingly, sparked an evolution in our thinking around pedagogy and hybrid learning methodologies. And now that we've seen the numbers and the data behind the survey results, we wanted to use this space as a launching pad for discussion between the educators and the students that we have with us today. So with me, I have Dr. Mark Schoenfield, an author and professor of English at Vanderbilt University, where he has recently received the Jeffrey Nordhaus Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching in the Humanities. We also have Dr. Mariana Burks, a biology instructor for the School of Biological Sciences and the science specialist for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Scholars Program. And along with our 2 instructors are our 2 student panelists. We have Manav Nahar, who recently graduated from Purdue University, majoring in industrial management and engineering from the Krannert School of Management. And finally, we have Kim Rousseau, who recently graduated from Kennesaw State University with a Bachelor of Business and Accounting, and she's currently enrolled for her Master's in Business Administration and seeking her CPA license. So I'd like to kick off this discussion on the topic of balancing work and school. And please share your thoughts and reactions to each other's comments because we definitely want this to be a dialogue and not just an interview. So, we heard during the presentation that educators, of course, do recognize the challenges their students face when it comes to balancing school with their work and their family obligations. But right behind work and family, educators said that they believe the next biggest barrier for student learning is more of a time management issue and that it's just too difficult for students to set aside enough time to study. On the other hand, students are saying one of the biggest barriers was needing more support, particularly the need for more detailed breakdowns and personalized instruction. So I'm going to hot potato this question. How do you think instructors and institutions can offer more support to students with jobs and families to improve their learning experience? And I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts, but maybe Mark, you can kick us off.
Sure. So the first thing I'd want to say is that balance for both faculty and students is at the moment radically shaped by the amount of ongoing trauma and post-traumatic stress that individuals face. And that's not always evident. And it's a problem that extends well outside any specific class. So I feel like within classes, it's much more important that we're providing not just clear maps for what is to be done, but clear rationales for why we're doing it. I always think of my syllabus as essentially the thesis of a class, which works well because I teach writing in my classes, and theses are a core concept. And then also, therefore, with that clear map, to give credit for the steps along the way, and then just keep reinforcing that in different ways. And the main thing, as I was thinking about this, it means is I've always been very upfront about how I make lots of mistakes. But now I've actually included in my syllabus that I will be making lots of mistakes, and that together we will turn them into learning experiences, and that I want students to regard their own mistakes similarly. And so if both mistakes and getting it right are ways of learning, then that changes how we want to go about assessing. It really emphasizes communication and de-emphasizes summative grading. And then the last thing I'll say is the main course I teach lately is existentialism. And that's a deliberate choice because it allows students to make their own lives partly the subject of their experience in the class. And I think that helps to provide a certain kind of, not balance between class and life, a certain kind of interaction between it. And I try to model that by teaching fairly autobiographically. Sometimes that leads to certain rabbit holes that I wish I weren't in, but I think it also allows students to really think about what's the purpose of this course for them, to take on that purpose for themselves. I think I've rambled long enough.
No, that was great. Mark, do you want to pass this off to one of our students to get their perspective on balancing work and life and how educators can help support that?
Sure, Kimberly.
Work-life balance. Oh my goodness, I'm one to go on that one. After coming from working from a pretty prestigious job as director of financial aid in a private school, I was carrying a full load in classes, as well as working full time. So a lot of times I had to try to ask my employer, hey, can I have an hour for this? Or hey, can I leave early? I think time management is so important with that, and getting that schedule down, but also a feel for the course. What is the course going to be like? How much time do I need to put into the course so that I can provide enough lenient area for the rest of my life going on, so I can balance everything. And that's something that I had to learn along the way. It was very difficult, but I finally figured out not everybody has that skill.
Mariana, I see you nodding your head. Do you want to add to that?
Sure. I think the most reflective aspect that I take into account in my biology courses is the feedback. And I provide that opportunity for students to give me feedback. Is this too much? What can we take away? What do I need to do to adjust so that you can meet the expectations of the course and your learning? So actually, I provide 3 opportunities for my students to give reflective feedback to me. What has been instrumental in terms of meeting your expectations for learning the course content? What can I do to help adjust that? Is the amount of practice, homework, and online discussions feasible for your learning? Are you getting something out of this? What's the takeaway? So actually what I do is I create a community of learning in the classroom. I'm learning from them just as they're learning from me. And so I think, again, providing opportunities for students to give us an assessment is really instrumental in terms of what we need to do as educators to adjust to their needs for learning and to be able to make sure that they can meet the expectations of their learning. Yes, the work-life balance is very hectic. Once we went to online, we created more fatigue for our students because they couldn't keep up with the demands of the online homework, the online testing, the online learning. And so again, if we experience that as educators, we could only imagine what our students were experiencing. So I think that we need to provide assessments for our students to give us some reflection in terms of, are we doing a good job of meeting the needs for your learning? Again, it's a two-way street in terms of, again, if we are expecting them to learn, then we should be learning from them as well. So that work-life balance is hard. It's hard for everyone in terms of what you're trying to meet in your own life goals, in terms of what the students are trying to achieve, in terms of their long-term goal for success. So again, I think that we shouldn't always put all of these assessments on students, but that we should provide assessments for ourselves so that we can actually adjust to the needs and meet those needs for their success.
Mm-hmm. And Manav, to Mariana's point about it being a two-way street, are these conversations that you've had with your instructors about work-life balance, and kind of what's been your experience with that?
Not really. I think time management on the personal side as myself was very critical. But when it comes to my interaction with my professor or faculty, either if I have a friendly relationship with them, it's always easy to share my experience and what the balance is, or even go to an office hour and speak to them. And lately, because of things happening in the recent year, all the teachers have been very open to any flexibility or change. But I think it's a very personal relationship and depends from class to class, because sometimes I'm in a class with 100, 150 students, those introductory courses in freshman, sophomore year. But as the classes get smaller, it gets easier with that flexibility and learning, for sure.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Pivoting just a little bit, we saw in the research that students and educators are aligned on student motivations to study. The top two reasons to study were to get a degree and to ultimately prepare for a career and get a job after school. One area where they clearly disagreed, though, was around the value of the GPA. Less than 50% of students said their GPA was a top priority, and instead students were more motivated by personal growth. So my question for you all is, how do you see the shift in focus on GPA to personal development evolving? And have you seen this happening in your classes? And Mariana, would you like to kick us off on that one?
Sure. Actually, my mantra for my students is that your course grade does not determine your success. Your success comes from where you started and where you are now. And again, we should not put value on what a student has attained overall in terms of their course of program study. We should just be happy that we're keeping our students in school. And again, understanding that we value them by retaining them, because they're growing from where they started at their institution to where they are midway in their development and growth, and where they land in terms of their employment, their career goals. And so employers don't ask during their interviews, what was your GPA when you graduated? They want to know what you've learned in the process of your program. What was the most growth? What the questions that are being asked now are, what was the most instrumental moment in your life in terms of your program? We're not basing this on points or assessments or GPAs. We're asking them about personal growth. And so again, these are reflective moments that employers are providing for incoming professionals. And so basing a student's worth on GPA does not show the reflective growth that they've experienced from the time that they've started their programs to where they end up actually being the most successful. So GPAs, again, should not actually, indicate a student's worth, but that again, their growth and what they've learned, what they've achieved in their own, life success or, program success. So again, growth comes from, again, those experiences on internships and how they've actually developed over time. So.
Kim, I saw you nodding your head along there. I'm interested to hear your perspective as a non-traditional student. what's been kind of your, how you've seen it evolve over the years?
Years ago, graduating from DeVry, GPA was important back then. That landed you a good job, either with the CIA, which requires a 3.5 or above, or just anywhere else, like Macy's. I think I went on a job interview at Macy's for electronic tech. They required over a 3. Did not land that job. I was below a 3, like a 2 point something. Now, as far as that's transgressed to today, I'm finding that with employers, yes, they look at a GPA. Yes, it's important, but they're looking at more of the person to fit into the work-life balance, into the company. As an accountant, or as I'm coming up as an accountant in business, they want to see how that person fits into the work life, and how they're going to act in there. I've also found out that my experience, where I've worked throughout the years, and customer service, and just the experience I've gotten through my life, actually is more important than my GPA. So that's where I'm sitting with that.
Now, what's your take as more of a traditional student? What's been kind of your path?
Yeah, 100%. First of all, GPA to measure the threshold, as she said, for a job, there's a basic requirement. So that's a good indicator, but because we're so many of us at the same time. But what I see, as Mariana said earlier, it does not reflect that growth. But personally, I have always tried to maintain a high GPA because that is how the current system works. But 30% was all the time I gave to academics. All the other time I was doing extracurricular, joining clubs, doing case competitions, doing other social stuff for my personal growth. And to be honest, now that I'm applying for jobs, GPA is only one thing that they look at for a quick second. Okay, you're above this. Okay, then we'll talk. And then there's the whole process where you have to talk about how you have actually learned and how you have actually grown. In fact, I feel even if you have a high GPA, sometimes that does not reflect a very high personal growth situation, because college was not just about academics. It's about you growing as a person, becoming an adult, and being able to work in the end, right? And make a good purpose out of your life. So if I were to change the system, I would take out the GPA system from education, and I would just have, if you pass the class or do you not pass the class. That's what I would propose if anyone like to do that.
Interesting. Mark, do you have any reactions or thoughts to that?
Yeah, first, I really agree with sort of what the students, what everyone was saying, but it is an interesting question how it arises that faculty have the perception that students care more about GPAs than faculty do, than students imagine they do. And I think that has to do with the way in which GPA and even within a class grades are very slippery proxies. They don't measure very well, we know that. But they are sort of taken as, whether it's a job, a kind of first cut thing, or for students, yes, you've got this if the test comes back in a certain way. And I think it'd be nice if we could somehow demystify that proxy work that they do, and really think much more about how grades work in the scaffolding of learning as one of many, many components. I'm not sure I can say this for people who are seeking jobs, but it's the GPAs have been sort of taken over by industries as commodities, is itself a problem with industry. And so maybe a little bit of my politics are shown.
No, thank you very much.
Just a few weeks ago, actually, I was having coffee with the associate dean of the School of Management. And she, in fact, was asking me that, Manav, how can we introduce this idea of not focusing on the GPA as much as you do? Because I was not always focused on GPA and doing other stuff. And she was asking me of how so many students here have as GPA as a primary focus, just getting in the class and getting a good GPA, and there was zero involvement in other activities and opportunities that the school is working on to present to them. So I'm sure like this is now well aware even with the educational system, and I think they're working on it for sure.
And of course, the other side of that is that's how people got into college in the first place, right? They're trained very early on for those magical numbers or letters, depending on how they're presented.
So coming off the topic of, oh, please continue.
The other thing I want to also stress is, as I teach science and biology introductory courses, this leads to their progression through their programs. So what I often see is that the grade is creating a lot of anxiety for students, especially students that are going into professional programs or thinking of medical school. And so, yes, when you think about how GPA is factored into more professional goal success, that is an indicator in terms of entrance into those professional programs. So for me, I'm balancing the achievement of the student, but also their learning outcomes. I focus more on their achievement in their learning, which will correlate with achievement of their course grades. So I don't want to give our listeners a perception that I completely disregard GPAs in terms of what is required down the road for those students. Yes, that is a huge factor in terms of entrance into professional programs as well as medical school. But I think what we're trying to convey here is that we want to slowly shift students away from that so that they can actually let go and experience the environment that's created for their learning. So if they're successful in that learning, then they show that success in the actual GPA and course grade. However, that does also couple with anxiety for students because, again, they're more concerned about their total GPA and where they're going to end with their program, rather than the growth and achievements that have come along with that success. So again, we want to make sure that we want our listeners to understand that, no, we do really understand the importance of GPAs, that we do understand that, again, this aligns with what students have to do in their futures, but that we as educators are really wanting our students to actually let go, enjoy their learning environment and their learning success that comes with that. So I just wanted to kind of, give some reflection for that as well.
Yes, I mean, grades, of course, are important, but then it's also an emphasis on developing your emotional intelligence and your soft skills that are needed for long-term workforce and professional life.
Yeah,
So,
I'm sorry, could I just add one thing that just follows up on that? I mean, one of the nice things about teaching writing is, of course, one of the key components to writing well is being able to self-assess whether or not you have in fact written well. And so in a way, grades can be sort of used to help students, but they can't be the main part, right? It's got to be comments and conversation. But ultimately, students need their own self-assessment skills in order to write well.
That is a perfect segue into our next topic of assessment. So when it comes to assessment, students and educators agreed that homework is actually the most fair method of assessing comprehension. But beyond that, opinions actually started diverging between the two groups. One assessment practice I'd like to explore more with this group is online discussions and forums, because this was the second most popular form of assessment for students, but it fell fifth on the list for educators. And we can actually start with the students here. Manav, can you speak to your experience using online discussions and forums and your thoughts on them as an effective and fair assessment tool?
Right, thanks, Sam. For me personally, and for my first social circle of friends and students, I think online forums and discussions have been personally the most important evaluation form, because, for example, we're studying something in class and the online forum is asking something related to that course material. And when I'm presenting or typing something into that online discussion, usually sometimes it's a mix of what I learned, but then what I have researched or what I think about it or what I feel about it. So essentially you're mixing in what you learned as knowledge, but also you're using that knowledge to answer a particular situation, which is presented as the form of the question. So it is actually the best way, because I mean, we were talking about how knowledge is of no use if it's not implemented right, and that's what determines the real education. So online forms and discussions are, I think, better than homework, because in homework, you're just trying to see if you have learned that topic well and answer those questions, let's say. But online discussions, also, you have the option of listening and looking at what other students have answered. So before me, some students have answered, I can go and read what they are thinking. And that, in fact, in those 10, 20 minutes, my own reasoning and understanding has developed instantly. And then I can present an even better solution or like response to that. So I think whenever that piece comes in, where you have a personal input with what you studied, it always works out. So I've enjoyed online discussions, online participation. And one thing was that in my school, we used online discussion mainly for attendance once everything went online. It was not always just used as a form of assessment or discussion, but it was forced as a piece of participation. But I think it'd be great if it was emphasized more as just a piece of study.
Kim, have you found online assessment forums to be online forums to be a good way to assess your knowledge, and what's been kind of the pros and cons for you on your part?
Yes, because I mean, let's say the questions proposed and there's a little something I have to read. I can read and see what other students have participated and written in the discussion forum. So I myself can see, okay, I didn't think of this, but this student has been thinking of this. So I can kind of assess in some sense if I was at least thinking in the right direction or how good I was thinking.
I totally agree. As far as that goes, I can kind of see from viewing, posts on certain things during the course, if I've got the information, if I'm retaining the information, if I understand the information, what level of understanding do I have just from gauging what other students have posted, which is really, really good for me. So sometimes I can see if I'm off. I know a lot of the asynchronous classes I have had, we had online posting, and some of them actually were too much online posting to where we were posting 3 times a week, and we had to reply to at least 5 other students. It was just busy work, so there is an overkill to online posting. And frankly, I was sitting there almost falling asleep trying to reply to, because the subject is so talked about that it's overkill. But does it help? Yeah, it really does.
Do you feel like there's a more or less effective way for instructors to be incorporating online forums into your classroom or into your classwork?
A less effective way? Well, I mean, like I said, there's I guess what you're asking me, I guess.
What works and what doesn't?
Too much posting doesn't work, because obviously we have other classes, and we, maybe like me, where I've got 2 kids in college and I'm trying to do my own study group with my own kids on a certain, their core classes, and I'm trying to go to work and juggle all these things, and all this posting, and it's too much, personally for me. And I know some of the other students that were in that class particularly, it was too much. It was a strange class to begin with. There were no books, so it was based off of responses and study cases. But yeah.
And for our educators here, Mark, do you incorporate online forums into your curriculum?
I do, and I think Kimberly's response was incredibly valuable to me, because what I find is discussion is almost a misnomer for the board. That is, I get very good initial responses from students, but the responses to those responses tend to be pro forma, where I'm kind of anticipating them having the kind of life that the responses have in the classrooms. So, maybe we need to, or I need to sort of rethink. I mean, one thing I have found that works is if the discussion board moves towards paper topics, then the intersections help more. But it is really critical, I think, that the discussion boards be really integrated into other aspects of the course. And I have to admit, I struggle with that. Sometimes they stand aside. I will say real quickly, I did experiment, and I'm going to keep it once we're back in person, with Perusal, which is one of many, or several anyway, online things which are, rather than discussion boards per se, you actually have the text that you're reading together and people can comment. And it can get very lively and sort of immediate. And I almost feel like it has that surprise of dopamine charge that we heard about earlier for learning, because there you are reading and someone else just comments on what you've just been reading and you have a little argument right as you're at that moment. And I think that's a kind of more lively discussion, non-board. But it is, something I struggle with, even though I can see just those initial posts have value in terms of people clarifying their own ideas to themselves and to others.
Yeah. Ariana, reactions to that, and curious if you were using online forums pre-pandemic, or if you've been incorporating them more, how that kind of strategy has changed for you.
Yes, actually, I had to make an adjustment and pivot those discussions because my students my completion rates were not very good. And so I realized when there wasn't a point associated or points associated with those discussions, my students weren't doing them. And so I wanted to provide them more of a reflective feedback of what they're comprehending and understanding, and being able to put that in their own words, because the language of science can become very complicated. So I wanted to ensure that I can see with a low stakes assignment or assessment, how much of that language they're comprehending and actually putting together accurately in any of those discussions. Students have actually indicated to me, please don't make me have to reply to 3 other students, just because you will know the amount of agreeability that you see in the actual responses to other students is there are memes that actually are hilarious that indicate there are more students that agree on Canvas in a discussion than any other platform. So I think for me, actually, yes, I did use discussions during the academic year. I've actually shifted and pulled away from those. I've turned those into more of an assignment where I provide some content, and I would like to just see the reflection of what they're understanding. And I think that we want to have healthy dialogue with discussions, but I think most importantly, we want to see what the students are understanding in terms of the content and their knowledge. So I've actually shifted away from a lot of discussion heavy participation because again, it felt like the students were saying, it's busy work. I don't have time for this. I can barely get my homework done. I'm just trying to make sure I'm preparing myself for what is required of meeting the expectations of the assignments. And so I realized again that I had to make a shift in terms of what the students were giving me feedback on. So yes, if discussions are, I think I'm freezing a little bit. I'll wait, I'll pause.
There you are.
Okay, if discussions are used not so heavily, maybe create those moments where you roll it into something that's formative for the student, but not so necessarily such a heavy workload in the course.
I want to shift and pivot a little bit over into a divisive topic among educators and students, and we can keep this brief because I know we're running low on time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about office hours and other in-person resources. So it may not surprise a lot of us that there are opposing views among students and faculty on the topic of office hours. Just as a reminder to the audience, only 15% of students said that they used office hours, and 81% of educators thought office hours was an appropriate study resource for students. So what do you think is the reason behind these very different views on office hours, and how might this gap in value be closed? And Kim, you want to kick us off there?
Office hours. Okay. So being old school like I am, a child of the 80s, I try to find resources at home, and I don't like doing office hours because I do have a busy schedule. However, I've used office hours in the past when I wasn't working full time, to get the help I needed. However, if I'm sitting at home like I am right now in my big comfy chair, and I can find it online, I'm not getting up and going to the school 15 minutes away to get extra help. I'm going to try and find it somewhere online so I don't have to leave the comfort of my home. And I think a lot of students are like that because they have busy schedules as well, and they want to move on to the next thing and get it done and over with and get that understanding, under their belt than having to set aside that hour or whatever you have to do to go into the school on campus. What works, those office hours are great, but also, and I wanted to say this again, flexibility outside those office hours can be Zoom, Collaborate Ultra, meeting at a certain time, obviously at good times, before dinner or whatever. Being a little bit more personable in that way also brings the student up, because often we feel like we're way below the professor, but it brings us up to, we feel like we're almost equal to where we can see, oh, you guys are real people too, because sometimes we feel that you aren't. Okay.
Any reactions to not being considered real people for the educators?
I wonder that about myself all the time.
Actually, Kim, I completely understand. I'm a parent of 5. My oldest daughter is a junior in college. So again, I'm trying to balance that time for myself, for my students, for what the need best is maximized in. I actually have more students that will email me. And because I'm so responsive in my correspondence, I'm able to give them an instant answer to what they're looking for, or at least guide them to the right information. So I found that correspondence for me has been the best source of being able to provide myself as a resource outside of class. I had office hours during Zoom that students didn't show. And so again, I think, being able to provide enough flexibility for students so that I can meet their needs, as well as not take outside of time that's going to be wasted just waiting for students and they don't show. So I think that, again, being able to assess, hey, what works best for you? Do you need to come in and actually sit with me? Does email work? Is there any other way that we can find a way to meet what your questions are outside of class time?
Thanks, Mariana. And I just want to be mindful of time right now. As we're nearing the end of our discussion, I'd love to maybe do a quick lightning round on perspectives on how assessment could evolve to help better prepare students for a real life work environment. Are you seeing this happen already? And if you have examples of that kind of assessment, we'd love to hear more about that as well. So maybe 20 to 30 seconds each if possible. Mark, do you want to start us off? No, okay. Who would like to kick us off? Anybody? I know it's a loaded question and it's hard to address in 20 seconds.
Hey, I can start. I feel the best assessment mode would be project-based learning and then presentation in the end, because the more the emotion involved and the more personal input involved combined with the knowledge that I'm learning in class, that would be the best for me to learn. And I think best way to see how I have transformed my knowledge into application and implementation. So essentially project-based learning and then presentation to deliver it.
Makes sense. Great.
Jump in now. Just to follow up on that. And the other side of that I think, can be really important for individuals is public facing work. There are so many ways students can have real communication with people beyond the teacher, beyond the classroom. And I think they build in a kind of self-assessment, which again, I think is a critical goal of education.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, please.
I provide self-reflectives for my students. What did you learn? What was the most impact in your learning? And what did you feel changed from where you started to where you know that information now? The exams are there again to provide them feedback to what their content knowledge is, but what I feel is more valuable to the student is their own self-reflections in terms of what they've gotten out of their learning.
Thanks, Mariana. All right, so we are actually at time right now. And with that, we have come to the end of the session. I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their experiences and their perspectives. And I want to thank you, our audience, for sharing this time with us. And I hope you all have a wonderful summer and go into the fall semester feeling energized, because as this panel has shown, we all want the best outcomes for each other. And it's open discussions like this between faculty and students that are really critical in understanding where we're at in our teaching and learning journeys. So thank you, everyone. Coming up next are 3 concurrent sessions on student equity, assessment design, and learning more about copyright online. So please head on over to the agenda page to learn more and join in the next discussion. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Sam, for guiding us.
Thanks.
That was terrific.
Yeah, thank you, Sam and the team.
Thank you, Manav. Thank you, Mariana, Kimberly. This is a great discussion.
Yeah, I saw in one of the chats, someone wanted to know about why are we not talking about academic dishonesty? And it is kind of interesting how much that haunts this, right? Like, that 2 or 5 or 10% that cheat. And as far, and I have a radical view on that. To hell with them. I'm going to teach for the other 90% and, hope they eventually get arrested. Which is more of a belief in karma than I have, than I know how the world works.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an interesting question that did haunt a lot of our conversation, I thought, in an interesting way.
Mark, are you saying you want to have a session for yourself called To Hell With Them? You maybe make that happen at Coursera.
I would want a lot of context for that particular topic.
and I've experienced that too. Actually, what has helped in terms of what has really brought down that is that we have a testing center at the university. And so they have to log in, it's proctored, which probably is a little bit more anxiety in terms of that. But what I found is that is a huge deterrent. If they don't complete the exam, they don't earn those points. So I know when it comes to writing, there's a lot more of that in terms of plagiarism because they get lazy. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but that laziness is a little bit on the teacher side too.
It could be, yeah.
That is, I ask questions that they will not find an online example of. Now, can they ask a friend to do it? Sure, but then I kind of feel like, so then the friend has learned something at least. Mm-hmm. I'll live with that. I don't. But also we talk about what they're writing. We talk about their thesis. So, I think plagiarism comes up most easily when it becomes a kind of rote paper 2 rather than paper on.
Well, I got to say too, in a lot of the papers I did, I was highly critical of that because I didn't want to be, charged with, plagiarism, so citation was very important. It's very important at KSU. Also, they have the turn it in with every assignment. You know, they have that set up in the university. So, and also I checked that on my side. So to make sure that nothing matched anybody else's, you know, I was very, very serious about that because I wanted to be original work. You know, are there students that probably copy or try to change words off of basically plagiarism? Yeah. But again, citation's very important. And if you cite, then you're not plagiarizing. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually object to Turnitin until Turnitin starts paying students for their work. Because you're providing data for them.
That's true. Yeah.
And you should be paid for that, compensated in some way for it. But I like the idea that you use it as your own tool. So that makes me feel a little bit better about it.
Yeah, I really do use it as a tool. So yeah.
I do as well.
Yeah, and we're having actually a problem. The MBA orientation gentleman had came up and spoke. They've got an issue right now with self-plagiarism, which usually isn't a thing, but apparently the students bringing forward papers he had done before in the current courses and not citing himself. A lot of people don't know about that.
Yeah, now that's a really tricky one at graduate level. Right, because you're working towards a dissertation, you know, in a PhD, different from your new coming up program. But, you know, you're thinking about and perfecting the same ideas. And what are the limits of that? How can you use material you worked out in a class for your qualifying exams? We're actually divided on that as a faculty. We've set a rule in place so that students can know, but we don't all agree with that rule, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, and I think too, as far as testing is concerned, I think Mariana might have spoke about this. Mark, you had said something too. You know, there's a lot of platforms out there that give the students access to online learning through the course, and they also give access to the teacher, you know, a pool of questions to ask for testing. I believe one of them, you can actually change the questions in there so that they don't show up on Quizlet, they don't show up on Course Hero, and they're more intensive, you know, to the student. They actually make them think more. So, you know, I want to say that changing questions and testing is very important as well. And coming from a beauty school, most of the answers to questions and even state board questions are on Quizlet.
And, you know, I think when we think about maybe the motivation for why students feel that they want to shortcut their own learning success, again, I think students have different reasons for why they're doing what they're doing. Again, it may have been that this rewarded them, you know, pre-college. And again, that they felt that that brought them their academic success. So I think sometimes we just want to understand the reason why students may feel that this is a way that it is not a penalization for them, but instead a motivator. So I think as long as we are providing more opportunities that move away from assessments that are going to, probably heighten why students cheat, maybe make it more reflective for them. What was your learning outcome? Provide them their own self-reflections in terms of what they're understanding in the content and not make it so question-based. A lot of times students, when they're going to take an exam, they're just choosing an answer. They're not really deciphering what the choices are in terms of moving to accuracy in their knowledge. And I think that sometimes if we give them a better explanation as to why they're learning the information, then they're not shortcutting their own learning success. So I think sometimes we need to not put so much weight on these assessments that cause them to move to this type of motivation, but rather provide, re-examine how we're assessing them. And I think that that moves the student to more accountability in themselves rather than shortcutting their own, learning outcomes.
Also with plagiarism, I mean, plagiarism is a very culturally specific conception that has a very specific history. So actually one of the things I write about in my own work. And some of my favorite authors were plagiarists. So I do think we need to be alert to teaching these rules as rules and not as intuitively universal values, but part of how this school, this academia functions, especially as we get more international students who come from different backgrounds where the understanding of the ownership of knowledge varies dramatically.
This is a great discussion. I could probably sit here all day.
We have gone a little off the rails.
I love just sitting here listening to everyone. It's awesome. But I do want to be mindful of everyone's time. And if you want to watch our later sessions, by all means, feel free to drop off, or if you have other things you need to do. But I guess we'll go ahead and close up this session.
I didn't realize people were still hanging around. Thank you all who were doing that.
Yeah, thanks for sticking around,
We appreciate your attention.
No, this is awesome stuff. We really appreciate your insights, and let's definitely reconnect for another event soon, because this is a conversation that should continue.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.